William expected an ordinary archival briefing. Instead, one cream-colored estate folder changed the temperature of the room. Buried beneath records associated with Queen Elizabeth's private property arrangements was a sealed retrieval trail bearing an unexpected connection to Meghan. The prince stopped reading halfway down the page. He looked again, slower this time, because in this dramatized version of events, the discovery did not merely concern missing paperwork. It suggested somebody had deliberately kept royal estate material out of sight. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William did not sit down. He kept one hand against the table while the senior archivist waited for him to speak, knowing the future king was processing far more than a routine discrepancy. The review had begun as a standard reconciliation of Elizabeth's private estate records after her death. Those estate records were documents concerning property and personal holdings belonging privately to the late monarch, rather than material belonging automatically to the crown as an institution. That distinction mattered because access depended on specific permission, not simply proximity to royal life. The prince turned another page and found the central problem laid out with brutal clarity. In this fictionalized account, archival records suggested Meghan had retained access to a restricted group of Elizabeth's private estate files, and that part of the material had never been formally returned when the collection was checked. William closed the folder immediately. He asked everyone except the archivist to leave, then remained standing as the door shut behind them. His silence carried anger, but beneath it sat something more personal. These were his grandmother's boundaries, and he believed she had drawn them for a reason. The archivist watched his expression change when he reached the handwritten classification code. That code marked documents as restricted material, meaning they were never intended for normal household circulation or casual consultation by family offices. William read it twice. Then he noticed something worse. One file listed on the archival index was physically absent from the returned collection. The index was simply the official list showing which documents should exist inside a particular archive. If one item was missing, this was no longer a question of unusual access. It was an active internal problem. William placed the index flat against the table and removed his glasses. "Nobody contacts anyone until I understand how this happened," he told the archivist. The future king was not ready to accuse Meghan publicly, and he was even less willing to drag Harry into another family war without knowing the full chain of access. But the discovery had already struck two wounds at once: loyalty to Elizabeth and the bitter fracture surrounding his brother. Then William asked the question that changed the direction of everything. Who knew she had access? The archivist hesitated before answering, and that hesitation told the prince enough. What stunned him was not merely Meghan's name on the trail. It was the possibility that she could never have reached those files without help from inside the royal machine. Documents can be catalogued. Family wounds cannot. Behind William's controlled expression sat years of broken trust, while behind Meghan's connection to the files lay a more complicated question. What had she believed those papers could prove? And caught between them was Harry, a son and brother whose loyalties had already been tested beyond repair. Suddenly, the archive was no longer a room filled with paper. It had become the battlefield of an unfinished family rupture. William carried the folder away from the archivists, but he could not carry it away from everything Elizabeth had meant to him. During years when family tensions had grown sharper and loyalties had shifted, the late queen had represented continuity, reassurance, and a sense that some boundaries still mattered. The private estate files now troubling him concerned property and personal holdings belonging to the monarch herself, rather than assets automatically controlled by the crown. In this dramatized account, that distinction made the discovery intensely personal. These were not simply institutional papers. They belonged to a world his grandmother had chosen to keep protected. Meghan's connection to that world carried its own emotional weight. She had long believed certain private estate decisions revealed how different family members were valued behind closed doors, especially when questions of homes, security, money, and status collided. That belief did not prove wrongdoing, but within this fictionalized narrative, It explained why the files might have mattered to her so deeply. For William, however, motive came second. If Elizabeth had deliberately restricted the material, then accessing it still meant crossing a boundary she had clearly drawn. Catherine found William alone with Elizabeth's old estate index and immediately noticed what was holding his attention. An estate index was simply the official record listing what documents should exist within a particular private collection. She touched the edge of the folder, but he did not look up. She trusted people to leave certain things alone, the prince whispered. Catherine studied him carefully and realized his anger was not centered on Meghan's name. It was centered on the missing file. Harry received the message soon afterward. William had asked one direct question. Had he known Meghan possessed or accessed the restricted material? He read the message twice. He knew any careless answer could wound his wife, deepen the breach with his brother, or place responsibility on himself. Minutes passed before he finally responded through the private exchange. 4 words appeared on William's screen. I never saw them. The future king stared at the reply. One possibility had disappeared, but something darker had replaced it. If Harry had never seen the files, then somebody else had helped move them beyond normal controls. William immediately ordered the archivists to reconstruct the final months before the Sussexes stepped back from frontline royal duties, meaning the period when they stopped performing regular official work on behalf of the monarchy. Every request, every authorization, every handoff would be examined. To understand why Meghan's name appeared at all, William would have to return to one forgotten palace encounter, and the precise afternoon when the boundary first broke. Every royal crisis has a moment that looks harmless until history turns back toward it. In this fictionalized account, that moment came during a private estate briefing months before Harry and Meghan stepped away from senior royal duties. Meghan asked a question about property arrangements she believed affected her family's standing. Elizabeth listened. Then the Queen gave a short answer that nobody in the room misunderstood. Those papers were private, restricted, and not hers to examine. Meghan had already begun to feel that royal life operated through invisible lines nobody explained until she crossed them. Security, residences, titles, and access to private family arrangements seemed to follow rules that were rarely written in plain language. Elizabeth's personal estate material was separate from constitutional crown records, meaning it concerned property and private holdings belonging personally to the monarch rather than documents tied automatically to the state. That difference mattered because access depended on direct private authorization, not simply status within the family. To Meghan, however, another closed door felt like proof that rank still decided who was trusted. The tension hardened during a fictional Sandringham estate briefing. Meghan asked whether she could review a restricted appendix dealing with future family property allocations. An appendix was simply an additional section attached to a larger document, often containing details too sensitive or technical for the main paper. Elizabeth listened without interruption, then reached forward and closed the folder herself. "That is private family business," the Queen said calmly. Meghan straightened in her chair, thanked her, and did not ask again. But the silence that followed carried more weight than the refusal itself. Meghan left the meeting feeling excluded and humiliated. The monarch, meanwhile, later told an aide in a private documented account that she regretted how institutional boundaries were increasingly being understood as personal rejection. Elizabeth believed privacy protected the family. Meghan believed privacy sometimes protected inequality. Neither woman changed her mind, and that difference quietly widened the distance between them. Harry learned about the exchange soon afterward and challenged why his wife had been denied information while other senior royals were trusted with sensitive discussions. He raised the issue privately with his grandmother, arguing that Meghan could not understand her place if information affecting their future remained hidden. Elizabeth refused to reopen the decision. Harry left frustrated, and the monarch was left saddened by how quickly one estate question had become another wound between them. Then something changed. Days after the refusal, an archive assistant received an unusual internal request referencing the same restricted appendix under a broader estate management authorization, meaning permission that appeared to cover administrative handling of private property records. The request did not come from Meghan. Years later, William finally had the name behind that authorization, and confronting that person would turn quiet suspicion into open family conflict. William did not summon a committee. He did not request talking points. In this dramatized confrontation, he asked Harry to speak privately and made one condition clear: no advisors, no aides, no intermediaries. The brothers entered carrying years of resentment, but only William carried the archive index. When he placed it between them, Harry's expression changed immediately. There would be no argument about press coverage this time, no competing narratives, only one brutal question. How had Meghan obtained material Elizabeth explicitly denied her? William kept his voice low, because anger was not the only thing holding him together. The internal authorization had been traced to a request routed through Harry's household during the tense months before the Sussex departure. A household, in royal terms, meant the staff structure handling schedules, correspondence, administration, and official requests for a senior royal. That mattered because paperwork often moved through several hands before reaching the person whose name sat above the office. Harry seized on that immediately. Staff processed requests constantly, he argued, and not every attachment was explained line by line. Harry felt the accusation tightening around him. William told his brother that resentment toward palace rules could never justify crossing boundaries their grandmother had deliberately protected. The words landed hard. Harry pushed back at once, accusing the prince of seeing Meghan's name and assuming guilt before understanding what had happened. His anger forced William into an uncomfortable distinction. He could distrust Meghan. He could resent the past, but neither feeling proved who knowingly released the files. The silence broke when Harry admitted something he had not previously stated in the private exchange. Meghan had asked someone within their office to help locate information connected to private estate arrangements because she believed those papers concerned their own future. He insisted she did not believe she was asking for restricted material. William listened without interrupting. The admission explained the request, but it did not explain what happened next. William opened the archive index again and turned to the most damaging page. An archive log was the formal record showing when sensitive material was removed, received, and returned. This one showed that the restricted bundle had been personally acknowledged after collection. Somebody had effectively confirmed that the papers delivered were the papers requested. That meant the problem was no longer just a vague administrative mistake. Harry stared at the entry, then pushed his chair back. He moved away, returned moments later, and pointed directly at the acknowledgement line. "That is not my signature." William did not hesitate. "I know." Harry looked at him again, and the anger between the brothers shifted into something colder. They had entered the room prepared to blame each other. Now both understood that Meghan may have received the files, but another person had controlled the paperwork, and whoever that person was, had just become the center of the crisis. A royal archive does not need raised voices to become dangerous. Sometimes one signature is enough. Once William realized the acknowledgement had not come from Harry, the scandal shifted away from marital loyalty and toward palace authority. Somebody had certified that restricted estate material had been handled correctly, when, according to the fictionalized archive trail, it had not. And suddenly, the most powerful person in the room was not a prince. It was the custodian holding the original register. William understood that the next step required discipline, not fury. The archival custodian controlled what experts call the provenance trail, meaning the documented history showing when a private file was requested, released, acknowledged, moved, and eventually returned. That record mattered because the prince could not simply decide what had happened based on suspicion. He needed to separate three possibilities: Meghan receiving material she should never have seen, somebody releasing it by mistake, or someone deliberately creating the appearance that everything had been handled correctly. Charles read the reconstructed trail privately and slowed when he reached the disputed acknowledgement. The king had spent years trying to stop family division from becoming permanent, yet the document forced him into a painful conflict between protecting stability and respecting his late mother's instructions. He asked William whether pursuing every detail would only drive Harry further away. The future king did not answer immediately. Then he said that ignoring the breach would make Elizabeth's boundaries meaningless. Charles looked down again, because he understood exactly what his son meant. The custodian finally supplied the detail that changed the balance of power. In a recorded internal account, prepared for the review, he confirmed that the acknowledgement had come through an administrative intermediary, a staff member authorized to close certain archive requests without requiring the recipient to sign personally. That explained why Harry's signature was absent. It did not explain why the request had been closed at all. Worse, the intermediary confirmed that one restricted bundle had never been formally checked back into the archive. Charles rubbed his thumb along the edge of the index as the implication settled over him. Whatever Meghan believed she had received, the missing file itself was no longer theoretical. Somewhere between release and return, the chain had broken. Intent remained uncertain. The absence did not. William watched his father carefully. For the first time, the monarch was not asking how the family could contain the problem. He was asking how they could establish the truth without turning uncertainty into accusation. Charles set the index down. "Then we ask her," the king said quietly, "not through anyone else." The decision changed everything. The palace had spent hours discussing Meghan without her. Now the question would reach Meghan herself, and her answer would change the emotional meaning of everything. The message arrived without accusation. That made it worse. In this dramatized version, Meghan was simply told that Elizabeth's archive had been reconciled, material connected to her had surfaced, and one restricted estate file remained unaccounted for. She read the wording carefully, then again. Years of conflict had taught her to expect hostility. What she had not expected was Elizabeth's private refusal from Sandringham to return, years later, in the form of an archival question she could no longer avoid. Meghan knew immediately which conversation the message referred to. She remembered asking about private estate arrangements, and she remembered the Queen closing that discussion with unmistakable finality. An estate archive was the protected collection of records connected to a monarch's personal property and private holdings, separate from ordinary public duties of the crown. That distinction now mattered painfully. What had once felt like another closed royal door had returned as a question of whether she had crossed a boundary she knew existed. Harry read the message beside her and told her something even harder. William possessed the retrieval trail and the administrative acknowledgement. The retrieval trail was the documented record showing when material had been requested, released, received, and returned. That meant simply denying contact with the papers would collapse immediately. Harry asked his wife to tell him exactly what she had received. Meghan bristled at the demand, insisting the prince had already decided what her motives were, because years of distrust had taught him to expect the worst from her. Meghan finally admitted that a packet had reached her after the original request was broadened by staff. She believed it had been lawfully cleared and assumed the papers concerned future arrangements affecting her household. Harry pressed her again. Had she kept anything? The question changed her expression. She remembered one photocopied appendix dealing with financial provisions she believed could affect him. An appendix was simply an added section attached to a larger document, often containing details omitted from the main text. She had retained the copy because she thought it belonged to information they were permitted to understand. The silence grew heavier when Meghan realized the missing archival item might correspond to that very appendix. She insisted she had never intended to conceal Elizabeth's private files, but intention could not answer where the copy now was. Harry asked her to search everything she had kept from that period. This time, she agreed without argument. Hours later, Meghan found the copy. She placed it on the table and stared at a familiar classification mark near the top. The symbol matched the restricted designation described in the palace message. Meghan sat opposite Harry and said quietly, "I thought I was allowed to have this." He did not answer immediately. For the first time, the crisis no longer hinged on whether the document existed. It hinged on whether William believed Meghan's explanation for keeping it. The turning point did not come inside an archive. It came when two brothers stopped speaking through systems built to protect them. In this fictionalized private conversation, Harry told William exactly what Meghan had found. exactly why she believed she could retain it, and exactly where the document now was. William listened without interrupting. The fury that had dominated the previous hours began to change, not into forgiveness, into something harder, the recognition that intent and consequence were no longer the same thing. Harry confirmed that Meghan had located the retained appendix and was prepared to return it intact. An appendix was an additional section attached to a larger document, often containing supporting details that were too sensitive or specific for the main file. That mattered because the practical mystery was finally ending. Elizabeth's private estate material was no longer missing in the literal sense. But the emotional question remained. Someone inside the palace had allowed access after the Queen had personally refused it, and William could no longer pretend the failure belonged to one person alone. Harry did not defend everything his wife had done. He admitted Meghan should have challenged the classification mark when the papers arrived, instead of assuming that authorization meant unrestricted ownership. The words cost him something. He had spent years protecting her from what he saw as unfair judgment, yet now he was acknowledging a mistake without surrendering her motives. William listened carefully, then made an admission of his own. The moment he saw Meghan's name in the archive trail, he had assumed deliberate concealment before understanding how badly the administrative chain had failed. The silence between them softened, but only slightly. Harry then revealed through the private conversation that Meghan was prepared to provide a written account explaining how the document reached her, why she believed she could retain it, and why she had kept the copy. The account would not be framed as a confession of theft. It would be a clarification of sequence and intent. William understood the difference immediately. Words mattered now because the wrong one could turn an internal failure into a permanent accusation. William folded the archival copy closed. "Return it," he told his brother. "Then this becomes about what went wrong, not what we want to believe about each other." Harry nodded. But neither man mistook the moment for reconciliation. Trust had not been restored. History had not been erased. Still, something had shifted. William decided the palace would not describe the episode as intentional stealing. The improper retention would be acknowledged, but so would the internal failure that enabled it. Then another message arrived. Word of the archive discovery had escaped palace walls. The brothers had finally reduced the accusation to something more truthful and more painful. Outside the palace, however, nuance was already disappearing. By sunrise, the private distinction between deliberate concealment and unauthorized retention had vanished beneath a single enormous headline. In this fictionalized public reaction, a London newspaper splashed "Elizabeth File Shock" across its front page, beneath photographs of William and Meghan. Television panels immediately divided into opposing camps. Some saw betrayal, others saw another example of palace dysfunction. And outside Windsor Castle, tourists began holding copies of the paper toward television cameras before the royal household had issued a single sentence. William watched the coverage harden into accusation. The archive trail had been complicated, but the public story was brutally simple. He was defending Elizabeth's wishes, while Meghan was once again framed as the outsider who had crossed a royal line. A royal household statement, meaning the official public response issued on behalf of senior members of the monarchy, now carried enormous risk. Silence could allow the most sensational version to become permanent. Yet an aggressive denial or attack could destroy the fragile progress he and Harry had made only hours earlier. The prince stiffened when one presenter used the word "stolen." He objected immediately because the evidence, even within this dramatized account, did not establish intentional theft. William had begun the crisis assuming concealment. Now he knew administrative failure had helped create the breach. That difference mattered. He had no intention of letting public anger erase it, simply because a harsher word made a better headline. Meghan saw the same coverage and felt the distinction between error and malice disappearing in real time. She told Harry that everything was being reduced to one familiar narrative, that she had knowingly taken what did not belong to her. He urged his wife not to answer publicly in anger. Harry knew a furious response might satisfy the moment, but could destroy the private understanding he had just reached with his brother. Outside Windsor Castle, the spectacle became impossible to ignore. A broadcaster held up the Elizabeth Fileshock front page, while a small crowd argued behind the barriers, some blaming Meghan, others attacking the palace for allowing restricted material to leave its control. Inside, William insisted the official wording remain narrow. Previously unreturned private archival material had been identified, and arrangements for its restoration had been completed. The future king went further. No accusation of criminal conduct, no claim of deliberate theft, no language designed to humiliate Meghan. That decision revealed how much his judgment had shifted since the archive box first stopped him cold, before the next decision became unavoidable. The headline wanted a villain. William now faced a harder responsibility, delivering a verdict that protected his grandmother's wishes without turning family failure into permanent family warfare. The crisis ended where it began, with a file on a table. But William was no longer the stunned man who had first opened the archive index. In this fictionalized conclusion, the missing estate material was returned, the administrative breach was documented, and Meghan's explanation was formally recorded. There would be no dramatic expulsion, no criminal accusation, no theatrical punishment. The consequence was quieter and more permanent. Elizabeth's private boundary would be restored, while every person involved would carry the cost of having crossed it. William watched the retained appendix return to the archive and be checked against the original register. The register was the official record showing what documents belonged in the collection, when they moved, and whether they had been properly restored. Once the pages matched, the custodian placed the material back within Elizabeth's restricted private estate collection. The practical crisis was over. The palace also tightened its internal rules, so no household intermediary could approve sensitive personal files again without direct custodial authorization. That change mattered because the system itself had helped create the confusion. Meghan accepted the harder personal consequence through her written account. Regardless of how the document had reached her, she acknowledged that keeping a restricted copy after Elizabeth had once refused access created a boundary problem she should have recognized. Her explanation did not erase the mistake, but it also did not prove deliberate theft. William faced his own uncomfortable truth at the same time. His first reaction had been shaped by years of distrust, and he had come dangerously close to treating suspicion as proof before the full trail emerged. Charles refused to let the episode become a punishment campaign. In a private recorded conversation with both sons, the king told them that protecting his mother's memory meant respecting her instructions, not turning her name into a weapon against one another. Harry understood the warning. William did too. Neither brother suddenly forgot the years between them, but both accepted the same boundary. The archive matter was settled, the material was restored, and neither side would publicly accuse the other of criminal intent. William remained beside the custodian as the restored appendix was secured inside its archival case. He did not celebrate, he did not look relieved, he simply nodded once and said, "That is where she wanted it." The words carried the final verdict. The real consequence was never just one estate file. It was the brutal reminder that once trust inside a family becomes fragile, even paperwork can become explosive. Elizabeth's boundary survived, but only after everyone involved was forced to separate misunderstanding from deception, loyalty from anger, and accountability from revenge. And with that lock turning, the crisis finally ended, not with Meghan destroyed or William triumphant, but with Elizabeth's wishes restored, a family forced to confront its assumptions, and the monarchy reminded that guarding trust can be far harder than guarding a crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.